Let me guess, you're about to take the SAT and you think you know every single grammar and reading rule possible until you find yourself on the second module on test day, and then you start panicking while the timer slowly runs itself out. Don't worry, that's what you and I are here for. Welcome to the Advanced SAT Drill by SAT Unfiltered. The goal of this video is to help you recognize patterns, grammar rules, and college board traps. If you would like more free resources, check out our page where we have many videos on SAT math, reading, and grammar hacks to help you prepare for your upcoming test. Since this video moves through fairly quickly, we recommend you pause the video and answer questions on your own. Good luck and go ace that SAT. The question reads, the Austronesian language family includes Tagalog, Malagasy, and some 1,200 other languages throughout the Pacific, making it one of the largest language families in the world and of keen interest to blank of the University of Toronto. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So if you look at the answer options, you realize that they pretty much all look the same, giving the occupation and the name of a person. So you realize that the context of the paragraph really has nothing to do with the right answer. So anytime the options look like this, it is always going to be the one without any punctuation, which is option C in this case, which is the right answer. The question says, as a behavioral economist, Katie Milkman of the University of Pennsylvania recognizes that people sometimes make irrational economic decisions. Milkman's research can thus address anomalies that neoclassical economic blank assume that people are consistently rational decision makers cannot explain. Which choice completes the text that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So just by looking at the question, we can see that it contains a dash in the same sentence we're trying to find an answer for. Dashes on the SAT always come in a pair of two, so we can cross out options B and C. We also know that dashes are used to contain non-essential clauses, meaning the sentence should still make sense if the stuff inside is removed. So by testing out the answer options that are left, option A is right. If you plug in the answer into the paragraph and ignore the context inside the dashes, it should still make sense. The question says, in a 2016 study, Eastern Washington University psychologist Amani Elalili found that among the study participants who experienced frisson, a physiological response akin to goosebumps or getting the chills while listening to music, there was one personality trait that they scored particularly blank: openness to experience. Which choice completes the text that conforms to the conventions of standard English? So just by looking at the options, we can cross out options A and B. A is wrong because it has a period, but the last portion of the paragraph on openness to experience isn't a full sentence, so that's wrong. And for B, a semicolon on the SAT functions as a period, so we don't have a full sentence here either. We're left with options C and D. C doesn't have any punctuation, so it doesn't account for the boundary we need between the main clause and the supplementary information. So the right answer is option D. In this choice, a colon is correctly used to mark the boundary and to introduce the information that identifies which personality trait participants scored especially high on. The question says, supported by biochemical analysis of over 2,000 skeletons from the Middle Ages, blank, which choice completes the text that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So just by looking at the question, we can see that it starts with a modifier. Modifiers are words or phrases that describe or add detail to other parts of the sentence. To identify them, locate detailed elements, which in this case would be biochemical analysis of over 2,000 skeletons from the Middle Ages. And modifiers are always placed immediately next to the subject they describe to avoid confusion. Based on the context, we can infer that this likely has to do with some sort of research or study. So hence, by looking at the options, we can see that the only sentence starting with a similar topic is choice D. This answer ensures that the modifying phrase appears immediately before the noun, clearly establishing that the findings from a 2022 study are being described. So the question reads, despite being cheap, versatile, and easy to produce, blank, they are made from non-renewable petroleum and most do not biodegrade in landfills. Which choice completes the text that it confirms in the conventions of standard English? So just by looking at the question, we can see that it starts with a modifier. Modifiers are words or phrases that describe or add detail to other parts of a sentence. And to identify them, locate descriptive elements, like cheap, versatile, and easy to produce in this scenario, and ensure that these modifiers are placed immediately next to the subject they're describing to avoid any confusion. So if you read through the options, we can see that commercial plastics is the subject that they're talking about. So if you go through the options, A, there are two problems associated with commercial plastics. It does not start with the subject, so it's wrong. B, two problems are associated with commercial plastics. That also doesn't start with the subject. C, commercial plastics, two associated problems are that. It does start with the subject, but it sounds illogical and awkward when you place it within the sentence. And D, commercial plastics have two associated problems. This is the best answer because a noun appears right after the modifier and it clearly establishes that commercial plastics are being described. The question says, an undergraduate researcher in anthropology, Jennifer Z. Chen, contributed to a groundbreaking study challenging the accepted view that among prehistoric peoples, female participation in hunting was blank. The research team's review of data from late Pleistocene and early Holocene burials in the Americas revealed that in fact as many as half of the hunters in those populations were female. which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase. So the text says that the study challenged the accepted view of female participation in hunting, and the text goes on to say that the researchers found that in fact as many as half the hunters in the group studied were female. The phrase "in fact" here establishes a contrast indicating that the new finding differs from the accepted view. So if we go through the options, choice A is incorrect because inevitable means unavoidable or meant to happen. Nothing in the text suggests that the accepted view is that prehistoric peoples could not avoid female participation in hunting. Choice B is incorrect because nothing in text refers to satisfactory or sufficient to meet a requirement or demand. There is no information in text about any demands or requirements regarding female participation in hunting. Choice C is actually the best answer because it logically completes the discussion. In this context, negligible means not significant enough to be worth considering, and it introduces the contrasting view that we discussed earlier. And choice D is also incorrect because commonplace means ordinary or unremarkable. Although the study under discussion suggests that female participation may have been commonplace, that study is presented as a challenging of the accepted view, not as reinforcing of the accepted view. What do you do first when you see an SAT grammar question? Read the whole passage, right? But when the question is testing subject-verb agreement, there's a much easier approach. The right answer is almost always in the sentence with the blank. In this case, the sentence is, the animal which lays eggs but also nurses blank young with milk has since been classified as belonging to the monotremes group. First, identify the subject of the sentence. The subject is the animal. That means the blank must refer back to it. Since the animal is a singular noun, we can cross out options A and B. Now look at the phrase nurses blank young with milk. We need a possessive pronoun because the animal is nursing its own young. So the correct word is its, which is option C, because the other option, its, with an apostrophe, refers to it is. Nurses it is young with milk does not make sense, so the answer is option C. The sentence says, in assessing the films of Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, blank have missed his equally deep engagement with Japanese artistic traditions such as Noh theater, which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English. So first focus on the verb after the blank, which is have missed. That means the subject of the sentence must be plural and must logically be the people evaluating his films. So who would those people be? Likely critics. Now quickly scan the answer choices. Choice A. Many critics have focused on Kurosawa's use of Western literary sources. This actually works perfectly. Many critics is the plural subject being described. Choice B starts with Kurosawa's use of Western literary sources. That would make the sources the subject, which doesn't make sense. Choice C begins with there are many critics. This is wordy and awkward, and the SAT avoids unnecessary constructions. Choice D talks about the focus of critics and not the critics themselves. So the correct answer is choice A. So let's read carefully. Barring major archaeological discoveries, we are unlikely to ever have blank account of ancient Egypt under the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, as much of the evidence of her reign was deliberately destroyed by her successors. Now let's break this down. The sentence is saying that the evidence was destroyed, so we're unlikely to ever have a full account of her reign. So the blank should mean something like complete and thorough. Now test the answers. Imaginative means creative or fictional. That doesn't relate to missing evidence. Superficial means shallow or not detailed. The sentence isn't saying the account will be shallow. It's saying that we can't fully reconstruct it. And exhaustive means complete and thorough. This matches perfectly with the idea that we can't have a fully complete account because evidence is missing. A questionable means doubtful or unreliable. The sentence isn't about whether the account is trustworthy, it's about whether it can be complete. So the correct answer is option C. If we look at our options, they all contain the word regions with a punctuation. So think of this question like breaking down a single continuous idea in a sentence. The phrase across regions and what impact it has is not introducing a separate clause that needs a break. It's extending the same verb, which is determine how. So we don't want to interrupt the flow after regions. Now let's test the punctuation logic. A comma would incorrectly create a pause where the sentence is still incomplete, and a colon or a semicolon would incorrectly suggest an explanation or two independent clauses, neither of which fits here. What we actually have is a smooth continuation of the idea, not a break or a list. Based on this understanding, the best answer here is option D. Sentences, Lily had no real intimacy with nature, but could be keenly sensitive to a scene which was a fitting background of her own sensations. So this establishes the idea that Lily connects her emotions to her surroundings. Now the underlined sentences, the landscape outspread below her seemed an enlargement of her present mood. This is showing the landscape reflecting her mood. So what is the function of that sentence? It's not introducing a new idea, it's showing an example of the idea from the previous sentence. Now let's go through the answer choices. Creates a detailed image of the setting. There's description, but that's not the main purpose. Establishes internal conflict. There's no conflict mentioned here. makes an assertion that the next sentence expands on. That's a wrong direction. We care about how it connects to what came before. Illustrates an idea introduced in the previous sentence. This actually matches perfectly. The correct answer is option D. Of Lotte Ranger's 1926 animated film The Adventures of Prince Ahmed was blank process. Over the course of 3 years, Ranger and her collaborators painstakingly made more than 250,000 individual images, and repeatedly had to invent entirely new methods and tools. Now focus on what this sentence is showing. 3 years, painstakingly, 250,000 images, inventing new tools. All of this points to a process that was long, difficult, and required a lot of effort. So let's test the answer choices. A haphazard means random or disorganized. That doesn't match something described as careful and painstaking. A contentious means involving conflict or disagreement. There's no mentions of arguments or disputes. And ineffectual means ineffective or not producing results. But the film was successfully created, so this doesn't fit. And arduous means difficult and requiring a lot of effort. This matches perfectly with all the details that were given to us. So the correct answer is option D. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it helpful, make sure to like this video and subscribe to SAT Unfiltered. If you would like more free resources, check out our page where we have many videos on SAT math, reading, and grammar hacks to help you prepare for your upcoming test.